Pop, 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 pass the popcorn, 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 pass the popcorn.
Welcome back to Alternate Ending, the show where we discover good movies, one bad movie at a time. I am your interim host, Brennan Klein, because all three of the other folks that do this podcast wanted Thanksgiving week off, understandably. They have families, they have people that they love. The three of us here today, though, we said, fuck it, we pushed everyone out the window. Just kidding, we're recording a week early. Anyway, I am here with alternate ending contributors, Mandy Albert. Hi, Mandy. How are you doing?
Howdy. I'm swell. How are you, Brennan?
I'm doing awesome. And Rioghnach Robinson. Hi, Rioghnach.
Hello. Hi. Hey, what's up?
The sky, obviously.
Yes, of course.
And the ceiling and the temperature, because Rioghnach and I are both in Florida right now.
Is this, so yes, I know, because Rioghnach, you're visiting Mandy for a school function, is that correct?
Yes, absolutely, to go and chat to some students.
Yeah, I mean,
How
what's
was
really
that? Did you have
happening?
fun?
It was great, it was so fun. The kids are so great. It was a blast.
They loved her. I have actually been getting texts all afternoon from the middle school teachers of my school telling me how great it was. So
that's
you were a
awesome.
hit.
Well, great.
The kids were very inspiring. We went through this character building exercise, and I was like, okay, well now I have to write this book that's based on this character that you guys invented and dedicated to you.
It sounded so cool because she was telling me about it, and it was like they grew this entire 14-year-old assassin character out of a single sentence that she gave them.
That sounds incredible.
Middle schoolers are iconic.
No, that's very true. And is it hot down there right now?
It was a very pleasant day today. It was about between 65 and 70 degrees most of the day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so not that this is a competition, but we're at 80 all week here in
my
California,
God.
and it is a bummer.
If that's a competition, then yeah, you're losing.
Yeah, exactly.
We were actually like that until very recently when Hurricane Nicole came through, and it was a baby hurricane. Everything is fine. And the nice thing that it did was that it cooled everything off, because it's basically like having a giant cold front come through. It sucked a lot of the energy out of the nearby ocean.
Oh, good stuff.
Okay. You know what? I have a friend named Nicole who has very cold hands, so it feels fitting to me.
Yeah, Nicole Kidman.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I felt her hands too on the regular. So
No, whenever she comes
Tim's
to this
gonna be
place for
jealous.
magic, I shake her hand.
Amazing.
yes, we come to this place to love.
But let's
God.
be honest, the reason that Rioghnach actually came here was so that we could hang out and we could podcast about things, and the whole come inspire the students at my school thing was just a front.
It was a detailed front for this episode.
Which is, Mandy, do you want to tell us what the impetus for this episode is?
Indeed. Okay, so first of all, don't everybody just stop listening when I tell you what the impetus for this episode was, because it's going to be great and you're going to love it. And we're going to talk about Twilight.
Yes.
We are going to look back on the Twilight movies, because the Twilight movie franchise is now 10 years old. Breaking Dawn Part 2 was released in 2012, 10 years ago.
So
and also we just wanted to talk about Twilight.
So it's more than 10 years old then, right?
Okay, so yeah.
This is its 10th anniversary of its death and decline.
Indeed. So this is 10th anniversary Twilight Memorial Day, I guess.
Yes.
We'll call it that.
We can also
Never
say that
forget.
it never died and will live forever. I think they say something to that effect at the end of Breaking Dawn. They're like,
They
it's
do.
time for forever.
Yes.
So that's great.
We have a long time to spend together forever. And then that cheesy song about loving you for 1,000 years starts, and I actually love that song.
Yes. Yeah.
Where did Christina Perry go? We need her again.
That's a great question.
A lonely and weary world is crying out for Christina Perry.
That is a very good question. And I do not know what the answer is.
I've gotta figure it out.
The
Gotta
answer
send
is she
out a
probably
hunt.
has 12 Christmas albums or something.
Probably. She probably went nowhere, and I just haven't been paying attention.
Yeah,
That does
it would
happen.
break her heart to hear this. Sorry, Christina, if
Yeah,
you're listening.
she is
But if-
among our loyal listeners. It is known.
Yeah, it would break her heart, which she would then put in a jar.
Yes,
Tearing love apart.
indeed.
Anyway,
Yeah, but Twilight.
Yeah, so Twilight. So anyway, we are going to combine our 3 interests. Well, we have more than 3 interests, but 3 of our major interests of the young adult fiction world, the mediocre twaddle world, and the come on, it's not that bad
Oh, yeah.
world, into this lovely discussion of looking back at the Twilight films. And also,
well,
I think all 3 of us have slightly complicated relationships to the Twilight franchise, so
yeah.
that will be fun to discuss as well.
I don't know that there exists such a thing as an uncomplicated relationship to Twilight
Fair.
in 2022.
Fair.
So I'm very curious to hear your Twilight stories, because I think you probably, if I had to guess, came to it maybe more organically than I did. But I'm curious to find out if that's accurate at all.
Wait, Brennan, how did you inorganically come to Twilight? That's a wonderful... I'm fascinated by this phrasing.
Should I tell my Twilight story?
Yes, please.
Absolutely.
What is your
Okay.
Twilight history?
My Twilight history, I came to the films in the exact way that God intended, which is I think I saw Twilight in theaters. I skipped New Moon. I
Okay.
saw Eclipse in theaters with my friend Nicole with the cold hands, because Inception we'd already seen. And then I worked at a movie theater. My first day was the premiere of Breaking Dawn Part 2, and that's one of
That
the worst
must have
days of my
been
life.
nuts.
Oh, no.
And then several years later, I was visiting a friend at her college, and she had a stoned friend who desperately wanted to watch Breaking Dawn Part 1, so that's when I saw that.
Okay.
So
That is an intriguing craving to have when you're stoned.
it's a thing that happened. He also ate an entire giant calzone. It was a great night.
Okay.
But anyway, I thought I didn't rewatch any of the movies in preparing for this podcast, because I wanted to preserve the ways in which the Twilight franchise intersected with my life as someone who grew up and continues to be a cis male, and was a teenager during all the years that this movie franchise existed. And I think that's of historical interest, probably, even though I was and am a gay person, so my experience of Twilight was slightly different from that. But for I'd say the first half of the film franchise's existence, I was not aware that I was a gay person. So I had
Okay.
as close as we can replicate of a straight high schooler's experience of Twilight.
Amazing.
But yeah, I'm curious. So Rioghnach, where did Twilight come into your life?
Yeah, okay, so my first, like, experience of Twilight was I was 12, and in middle school, there was this copy of Twilight that I guess it came from the library. I remember, like, seeing this book. Suddenly it was everywhere. Like, all of the girls were, like, reading this book that had the cupped hands and the apple on the front. And I was vaguely aware that there was derision directed at this book, and specifically, like, gendered derision, where it was like, oh, look at this dumb girl thing. And I, in my extremely internalized misogynist self at age 12, was like, well, I'm not a dumb girl, so surely that can't be for me. And there was also this weird dichotomy at the time where, like, it was almost encouraged to have, like, this binary attitude toward, like, Twilight versus the Harry Potter franchise.
I do remember that.
Yeah,
Oh,
where it was like, which camp are you in? Like, which one do you like, as though there could only be one? And I was like, well, my territory was staked out at the time in the world of Harry Potter. And so I was like, well, thereby, by this weird skewed logic, I cannot like the other thing. So then, after, like, a year or so, I read the first one, and it was like, I mean, like, the addictive power that this book had over... I have this, like, theory that children bring far more imagination to novels than adults do. Like, kids put so much into simple sentences, and to them it's very fertile ground. If you describe something in a simple way, they will put things into it that I think adults expect authors to do that work instead. And, like, I think that's why... a big part of the reason why I think Twilight plays so well with a younger audience, because there's a lot of those, like, what we as adults can all now read and be like, well, that's a blank space. For kids, that's like, this is where your imagination goes, and this is where your emotions are filling in all the gaps. So, like, totally addictive. I can't remember how many were out at the time, but however many there were, I tore through them, read them like as soon as they came out. But at the same time, there was like a part of me that even while I was like AIMing one of my friends at the time to be like, no, Edward is my boyfriend,
Oh
I
my
was
God.
also like, yeah.
That's literally what AIM was for.
Yes, exactly. Even simultaneously to that, I was like putting on this face more in public where I was like, yeah, I know it's so stupid and ridiculous. Like, it's so dumb. Ha ha ha. Look at this trash I'm reading. And then as I kind of aged out of the series, I think I watched the first movie and then maybe the second, and then I really felt properly too old, and I began to be, I kind of reverted to that kind of derisive feeling, and like more genuinely have grappled since then as to the question of like, you know, how much of it is good and accesses something that isn't generally otherwise accessed, and how much of it is something unexceptional. Like, what is the deal with it? I just find it, like, I still find it a very interesting object, but had not watched the last 3 movies until starting about a week ago for this very podcast.
Oh, this was your first time.
Yeah, through Eclipse and then the Breaking Dawns. This was the first
We
time.
watched Breaking Dawn Part 2 together in my
Yes.
house last night.
Yeah,
Oh
it was
my
so
goodness.
fun.
Okay, then I super can't wait to talk about that. I had no idea that it was that you had that kind of gap. So you really
Yeah.
you had a full decade.
Oh, yes.
In which
Spread
these movies were
across.
stewing and waiting for you.
Stewing.
Yes.
Like Kristen I'm gonna stop now.
Hey, I mean,
because
that's something.
I'm ashamed that popped into my head and that I even considered saying it.
Run with it. Run with it.
But, but that reminds me of 2 things really quick. Is that I didn't talk about the books. I had no real relationship to the books. I knew that everyone was reading them. I knew that I was supposed to hate them. I watched a YouTube series by Alex Day called Alex Reads Twilight, where he
Yes.
was
Oh my god, I remember
You remember
those.
that?
Yeah.
I never watched them, but I do have a memory of them existing.
Yes.
Okay,
and-
I loved those. So that was my exposure to the prose of Stephanie Meyer.
Okay.
Yeah.
But also, what you were talking about the kind of internalized misogyny and that kind of double life that it led you to live, where it's like your AIM away message is like, and so the lion fell in love with the lamb. But you know, out in the world, things are different. I think that my Twilight experience also kind of mirrors my coming out experience, which is I think, in ways that are different for everyone. Coming out kind of goes hand in hand. Well, anyone who is emotionally aware, maybe coming out kind of goes hand in hand with a reduction of misogyny, because homophobia is so rooted in the idea that things that women like are bad. Even in
Like
the sense
boys.
of exactly. Like liking the things that women like is a problem, and so coming to terms with that is kind of my reduction of misogyny journey, like as a teenager.
Yeah.
So I definitely became more open-hearted to experiencing things like, you know what, I do love Lady Gaga's poker face, or I am gonna buy Kesha's album, which has 5 #1 hits on it.
Yes, absolutely. As you should.
Yeah, and Twilight is something that I became more open-hearted toward experiencing, but I had already kind of fractured my experience of it, so it wasn't something that I felt like I needed to complete. Like, I've still never seen New Moon.
Oh.
But it's something that
You should watch New Moon.
I
was
saw
my
both
favorite.
of your Letterboxd reviews. I'm maybe going to. We'll see.
Yes.
But yeah, that just was very interesting to me and kind of poked that memory out of my brain.
Yeah. Oh man. That's kind of how I feel about the music of Taylor Swift as well. Like, I feel very strongly about her music because it mirrors it maps pretty closely onto my journey into like identifying as like a feminist and rejecting all of the terrors of being like a dismissed like girl, woman, child that I was. Like, just maps pretty perfectly onto me being like, I hate Taylor Swift and anyone who listens to her is stupid. And then, you know, now I don't care. I love her music. But, you know, now it's respectable to do so. People have caught up, it seems like. Anyway.
That does happen.
Yeah.
It does.
But no-
And I think that there's a little bit of that happening with the general Twilight verse. There were a series of YouTube videos that came out a couple of years ago from a couple of big like content creators that were kind of like, maybe we were a little too hard on Twilight type things. I know that like Lindsay Ellis did one, and I think a couple of other people in her sphere did one. I don't remember all of them, and I didn't really watch most of them, but I just remember seeing their existence, and I was kind of like, haha, you're all starting to catch on. My own Twilight journey started in fan fiction, actually.
What?
It started in fanfiction.
It started in fan fiction because once upon a time, young Mandy was in high school, and two things were happening. The first was that I was writing a lot of fan fiction, some of which still exists on the internet, and no, you cannot see it.
Oh, yes, I can.
Can I know
I will
what
find-
property
I have-
it was about?
I have not given my own husband access to my fan fiction. I am definitely not giving it to anybody else. But you could probably find me if you looked hard enough. I had a lot of fanfics in the Babylon 5 community. I had a few Harry Potters. I had some Daily Show fan fiction.
Really? That's fascinating.
Which that
So,
Yes.
So was it romantic fan fiction, or was it like?
yes, of course it was.
Jon Stewart, ex-reader?
It was Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert mostly.
Oh, I love that.
Like I said, this can probably be found if you want to. But I don't just give it out to people because, among other things, this is all many years old at this point. But so I was very much into fan fiction, and the other thing that I was very into at the time was gay boys, which goes
I get it.
which goes kind of along with fan fiction. And so this led me to the discovery of, is there a cutesy name for Edward Jacob fan fiction? Because if there is, I don't know about it.
Jedward?
Jedward?
Yeah, not
Is
that
that
I'm
it?
aware of.
Ed Wacob?
Yeah.
There's
Awful.
probably a lot of cutesy names for it, like Sparkly
Yeah.
Wolf or something like
Yeah,
that.
I
But
bet.
Oh, that's totally it. That's got to be it.
Sparkle Wolf. We're gonna go with Sparkle Wolf.
I think I may have heard the phrase Sparkle Wolf before. I think that might be it, actually.
Yeah, okay, so I discovered Sparkle Wolf fanfiction, and that was my introduction to the existence of Twilight. For a brief digression, I'm going to do something very stupid now and wade briefly into Bros discourse.
Oh.
I have not seen Bros, the Billy Eichner comedy rom-com thing that's out right now, in part because I find Billy Eichner to be approximately as pleasant as listening to a fork go through a garbage disposal. But I have read some of the discourse with a capital D,
Oh, yeah.
one of which was a film critic, not alternate ending, but one that I respect and whose reviews I read much of the time, but who said in his review, because he was talking about like why people aren't going to see it, and one of the things he said was, women don't want to watch men make out. And I was
Oh.
like, you are wrong,
no.
sir. That is
that is
incorrect. I don't know
very
why
untrue.
people aren't going to see this movie, but that is not why.
Yeah.
Because women, especially like women who like men, love watching men make out.
Yeah. Have you looked at the shelves of the young adult section lately? You know,
Indeed.
And the
That's like-
new adult section as well.
And I'm also one of my other formative teenage memories around the same time that I was deeply into fan fiction and discovering Twilight via fan fiction was that the first movie I ever snuck into was Brokeback Mountain because I was 15 when it came out. So I was a little too young to get in by myself, but a group of my friends, all of my girlfriends from high school, and I snuck in. And we were surrounded by other teenage girls who had snuck in to Brokeback Mountain.
gosh.
I swear that theater was 75% girls between the ages of 14 and 18
look,
who
I've
had
got to
heard
say,
that Heath Ledger and Jake Gyllenhaal were going to make out, and that's why they were there.
Yeah.
And then
I've
it was
gotta say-
also
oh,
a
yeah,
beautiful, heartbreaking movie, but that was just a bonus to
Of
go
course.
along with the boys kissing.
no, I do want to just give a big thank you to the teenage girls out there because there are way more teenage girls than there are gay people.
Yes.
That's just a statistic. And your money really gives me a lot of things to read and a lot of movies to watch, and I really
Thank you,
appreciate
teenage
that.
girls. You're the
Yeah,
best.
exactly. You gave me 3 seasons of Love, Victor, and I appreciate it.
Yes.
Yeah. I have
my
a theory
gosh.
that they also provided several seasons worth of Oz, but I'm not sure. Oz was also a very formative experience for baby Mandy.
Man.
Interesting. Did you write about it ever?
That might have. That might have happened. Anyway, we were talking about Twilight. So
Yes.
I discovered Twilight via fanfiction, and I was immediately very disappointed to discover that nobody in Twilight was actually gay when I picked up the first book.
Still a major oversight.
It was a big letdown, and I was very mad. And then I finished the entire book in one night, despite the fact that I was very mad. And of course, I was immediately like, well, that was stupid, and I hate that. But also, I had finished the entire book in one night. So really, I was lying to myself. Lying to yourself is a big pattern in Twilight stories we are seeing.
Absolutely.
And then I resisted for a while because, again, it was central to my identity. I resisted for a while reading any of the other books. And then one day when I was pretty sure nobody was looking, I picked up New Moon, and again, I read it in one sitting. And the entire time I'm going like, this is stupid, this is idiotic, she's such a moron, he's so boring, they're so boring, ugh, I am so above this, and I have to know what happens next. And so by the time we got to 2008, when Twilight #1 came out in theaters, I was a freshman in college. My roommate was also a closeted Twilight fan, and so we went to see the premiere together. I was kind of for a while, I was very adamant that my love for the Twilight movies and for the books was 100% ironic. Like, it was all like, this is a so bad it's good thing. Like, it is nothing more than that. Then I started describing it as more of a guilty pleasure. And then it started to transition to my love for these things is perhaps not as ironic as it should be.
Yeah.
And now I have dropped the should from that, and I'm just willing to acknowledge that my enjoyment of both the Twilight books and the Twilight movies is in large part unironic at this point.
Oh, man. There's such complicated feelings, though, because then, I hear that, but then I also raise you the question, do you think they're good, is the question.
That is also a complicated question.
Right. Yeah.
Because no, but also yes.
Right. Like, how can they not be good if they tap into some elemental feeling? But then, are they good? It seems absurd to say that they are, but they must be. But are they? I don't know. I go back and forth
And
so
this applies again both to the books and to the movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is such a complicated question to answer. I will say, the one book thing of Twilight that I read last year. I actually read the
Midnight Sun.
Oh no.
Okay.
I did read the Life and Death edition where Bella is a male named Bo and Edward is a female named Edith.
I wanted to read that because then Jacob turns into like a hot lady mechanic.
Yes.
And I was like, this would be maybe even more bisexual friendly than regular Twilight is.
Wow. Okay.
Which is saying something.
Absolutely. I will say I enjoyed that I wouldn't say that I was like, wow, this is well written, but I was also like, wow, this is less badly written than I was led to believe.
Yeah.
I think the hurdle with Twilight now as an adult is the thing of like this extremely Mormon structure of romance and relationships and this extremely people point out a lot of the issues with the way that Edward courts Bella as far as modeling relationships for teenagers.
Yeah.
But I would also like to throw out there that yes, if in a work of teenage fiction, the idea that is presented as an ideal, sure, that's not great. We don't love that. But in the idea that this is a fantasy romance, there is a measure of consent given by a reader to a character to be imaginary, and there is a trust given to a fictional character, especially one that you create or fantasize about, that cannot be given to a real human being. And there is such a complete and total separation between those two things. I don't know how many people that age are able to separate those, but teenagers are always smarter than we give them credit for. So I'm willing to extend the benefit of the doubt there as well.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like it's definitely some kind of a fantasy. And it's also like the types, because it is like paranormal, the types of fantasy that it is are you know, it's fusing this strange, like, codependent relationship fantasy with, like, this sort of, like, brink of death idolization fantasy where she's obsessed with, like, coming close to death. And, like, you have not seen New Moon, but, like, that's a huge plot point in New Moon. But then
I'm aware of everything that happens in New Moon.
Okay.
I just haven't sat through it.
Yeah. But, I mean, even throughout the rest of the series, like, it's the same sort of thing where the obsession is, like, how close can you get to death without, like, touching it? And that danger is, like, you know, that's what provides so much of the thrill. And then I think, you know, who are we to say that, like, the romantic fantasy angle isn't something of the same thing where it's, like, you know, how close can you get to somebody, like, acting in ways that are extremely codependent, but then, like, it's somebody who doesn't mean you harm. Like, I think the emotional and the, like, physical levels work very similarly where, you know, in both cases, she's coming up to the edge of something that could be really bad, and in neither case, it is bad. Like, in both cases, she turns out to be, like, happy and loved, and I'm like, is that maybe the ultimate, like, fantasy aspect of what's happening in there? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I mean, that's one of the many complicated things about Twilight. And I didn't mean to derail it because we were talking about whether or not it's good.
I mean, that's an aspect of whether or not it's good, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is true. I think that's good. That's good or bad more on a meta level than I think is something that we're really diving into as far as, like, what is the purest objective truth we can approach about this, which is obviously not a thing you can do when reviewing movies ever.
Indeed. So I will offer my...
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was saying, I think Catherine Hardwicke directs the hell out of that first Twilight movie.
Oh, yeah. Catherine Hardwicke is directing that and hoping to get another directing job in the future.
Blue tint or not.
Yeah,
Blue
exactly.
Tint or not.
And that is still a choice. That is a choice that she made, and it's a choice that she made that kind of defined a generation of films. So
We were talking about this earlier. Like, she made aesthetic choices, and there are so many movies where that is simply not done.
Yeah.
Where the idea of aesthetic anything is just a foreign concept to these people who claim to work with images.
For instance, Eclipse.
Yeah.
The nadir of the series by
Yeah.
such an incredible margin.
Oh my god.
Oh my god.
It's so bad.
No
Eclipse is
plot
so bad.
point was had that day.
It was also the worst of the books, to be entirely fair to them. It mystified me that when Eclipse came out, all the critics were like, this is the good Twilight movie.
What?
And I was like, the hell movie did you people watch? Because it wasn't the same one I did.
maybe it was the least Twilight movie is what they were actually
I
saying.
bet that was it.
Yeah.
And I'm actually going to offer my spiciest Twilight take now.
I'm stealing
I think that on the page, in the films is another story, but on the page, I think Bella Swan is a really interesting character.
Aha! Aha! I won't disagree with that.
I am now one of two people I've ever heard say that. I reread the first Twilight book not all that long ago because I do that every so often. And like Bella Swan, for those of you who are either very young or have never approached Twilight except from an extreme distance, just a little bit about what Twilight is that we haven't actually provided
right.
yet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oops. Oops. Oh, well. That's fine. So, what Twilight is is a series of 4 books by Stephanie Meyer. They were kind of targeted towards the, like, older teenage set, I would say. Like, maybe, like, the tween to teenage set, I guess. Older teenage is probably a little too old for them. But
yeah, like maybe teenagers who want to have sex but are also kind of afraid of it and aren't having it yet.
and aren't having it yet, but have gotten to the point where they like thinking about the idea of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the protagonist is I think when it starts, she's 16, is a 16-year-old girl named Bella Swan, who describes herself as being very plain and very clumsy and generally very ordinary, but also she's kind of a nerd and kind of a wallflower. And she moves to live with her dad in a rainy little town called Forks, Washington. And in Forks, Washington, she meets this total dreamboat at her school whose name is Edward Cullen, and who's kind of weird because, among other things, he hangs out with his family who appear from the very beginning to be kind of extremely incestuous with each other. Like, everybody at their school has noticed this, and everybody just seems to think it's an interesting curiosity and not anything else, which I love how non-judgmental they are about it, you know? Like, they're like, okay, this is kind of weird, but, you know, to each their own. We
date
just,
each other.
Yeah, this adopted family that all date each other, you know? That's how you find love in high school, apparently. But anyway, Edward is instantly drawn to her for a variety of reasons. And then, of course, it turns out that Edward and all his adopted siblings are actually vampires. And so the remainder of the story... Oh, and there's another boy that Bella was, like, childhood friends with. His name is Jacob Black, and he's a werewolf. He belongs to a local... a locally based tribe of Native Americans called the Quaaludes. And they're all werewolves. And he's also super into Bella. For being a very plain and boring girl, she sure has a lot of guys who are super duper into her.
Many of them.
Indeed. But the books basically tell the love story of Edward and Bella. Like, they're a series of vampire romance novels for teenagers, is the basic way of explaining it. And one of the major areas of flack that the books have gotten from pretty much everybody, and the movies later on got from pretty much everybody, was that Bella Swan is basically a blank slate of a character. She is unrealistic, and she's boring, and she has no personality, and she's kind of dull and dour, and she thinks way too highly of herself, and blah, 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 blah. So that was one of the big criticisms, was that, like, she's a bad role model for teenage girls, and she's boring, and she's dull, and she's poorly written. And aside from the bad role model for teenage girls, which, first of all, if your role models for your teenage girls are characters in a teenage vampire romance, then be a better parent or a better adult mentor, is all I have to say.
Also, give the child more than one book.
And
like,
also give the child
be on
more than
Bella
one book.
Swan's shoulders.
Yeah, don't make Bella Swan do this. She's dealing with enough. But the thing about Bella, as she exists in the books and not in people's imaginations, the imaginations mostly of people who haven't read the book, is that I find her to be an actually very realistic teenage girl. As someone who was at one point a teenage girl, I recognize a lot of what I used to be like in her. Because the thing is, like, she gets a lot of flack because, like, she's kind of dumb and she does a lot of dumb things a lot of the time and she's impulsive. And I have news for you, people. Teenagers are dumb. Like, yes, as Brennan said earlier, they can also be a lot smarter than we give them credit for, but simply because of the stage in which they exist in life, teenagers are dumb. They do dumb things. They feel things very strongly. They're very impulsive. If any of my students are listening right now, first of all, you shouldn't be listening to this. It's marked explicit on Apple Podcasts, but you know this to be true about yourselves.
Yeah, no, like, teenagers can both read and love Pride and Prejudice and also jump off a roof into a pool. That's part of the experience.
Yeah, those are things that exist simultaneously and without contradiction in the minds of teenagers. They can be very smart and incredibly dumb at the same time. Also, a thing about teenagers, and I would say especially a lot of teenage girls, is that they do spend a lot of time living in their own heads. And also, a lot of teenage girls are deeply insecure. It is very possible for a teenage girl to be absolutely gorgeous and not believe that she is in any way absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, I don't know why the first thing everyone says about Bella Swan isn't that she's an unreliable narrator. Like, I just feel like that's pretty obvious, like, surface level reading of Twilight, is that she's like, oh, I'm not pretty, and then clearly, like, Meyer is showing us that she's pretty. Like, this is stuff that you would be able to spot in literally any, like, intro, like, level, high school English class, and yet there are so many people who, like, seemingly in their desire to write off the possibility that there could be anything literary-wise interesting going on in Twilight, must say that there cannot be something like unreliable narration happening. And I think it's kind of cool because she, like, I don't know, I think she's unreliable, obviously, for that reason, but then also, she has these desires that are, like, she's very strident about her desire to, like, have sex a lot, like, a lot.
She's horny as hell.
Yeah, she's incredibly horny.
Like
and she,
in, a sweet virginal Mormon kind of way, but still, she's horny as hell.
And she wants to, she has this desire to, like, approach death and to, like, hold it very close to her for, like, long periods of time. And she has this kind of weird relationship to risk where, like, does she care about it? What does she, like, does she have any sense of, like, self-preservation? Like, what's the deal with that? Like, and then she has this, she aspires, like, to become a vampire, which is, like, an immortal, powerful, blood-drinking, like, monster. Like, she knows what that entails. Like, and these are things that she wants very vigorously and aggressively, and I don't think that they're uninteresting things to want, and I think that they're kind of contradictory to the idea of her as a, like, mild-mannered everyday character, which is how she, like, sees herself. And I think it's cool that what we can potentially see if we look at her a little bit harder is somebody who wants power and wants, like, strength, who wants to be dangerous, who wants to be close to danger, who wants to, like, fuck all the time, who, like, you know, all this stuff is, like, moving around under the surface and it's packed into this, like, placid little case. I think it's interesting.
And part of her becoming a vampire is learning to let some of that out
Yeah.
and being able to let some of that out.
Right. Ah, man. Yeah.
Yeah, and some of the, like, one of the groups of people that is the most disempowered in the societal structure that we have, especially in the U.S., are teenage girls.
Yeah.
So that makes perfect sense. And also what you said about her being obsessed with death, I'd never thought about that specifically. But you're right, and that exact way of looking at death and kind of poking at it and examining it is such a teenage thing.
Yeah.
It absolutely
you're
is.
just, like, figuring that out. You're like, I have a limited number of years on this earth. Although, you know, death seems so far away in a lot of ways when you're a teenager. Like, I don't know, it's definitely, you start coming to terms with something about it.
I think there's something about going through puberty that kind of makes people come face to face with their own mortality for the first time, because your body starts to do things that you can't control.
Yeah.
And then you realize that there are all kinds of other things your body might do that you can't control.
Yeah, I'm entering
Yeah.
my final version of my, you know, my meat prison.
Yeah.
And
like,
then, yeah.
like, there's still this kind of glass wall between you and death for the most part. I mean, you know, teenagers die. You know, that
Yeah.
is a shitty thing,
Yeah.
and I you know, people experience that. I know I have in certain parts of my life at that age, but, like, there is still, for the most part, it does feel like this kind of distant, far away thing that you know is there, and you kind of have this irresistible kind of, like, car crash urge to examine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the other, like, well, there are lots of criticisms that usually people who haven't read the books or seen the movies, throw at Twilight. But, of course, one of the other big ones is the relationship between her and Edward that, of course, forms the foundation of the entire series. And I hear all of the critiques about it's an unhealthy relationship and
Yeah.
the love triangle between her and Edward and Jacob is boring, and
It's
I
so
hear all of
controlling.
it,
Yeah,
and it's controlling and blah, blah, blah. However, what I think it is a very accurate depiction of the feeling of falling in love when you are young for the first time. Because I'm a little bit removed from my teenage years at this point, not as much as I once was, but I don't think I'm so far removed from them that I can't remember any of that. And, like, I do have memories of those feelings, and Stephanie Meyer got them. Like, especially when you are of the age where, like, you are vaguely aware that sex is a thing you might want to do someday, but it's still kind of, like, pushed off to the back of, no, that's not something I do right now.
Yeah.
Like, when it's still kind of in the, like, when it's still kind of in the first falling in love stage, like, you believe no one's ever felt this way about anybody else before. And then you grow up and you realize that you were dumb and you were a teenager and your hormones were controlling you and blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't take away from the actual validity of the feeling and the actual power of the feeling.
Yeah,
And the
absolutely.
obsession that she develops with Edward, like, maybe it's not healthy, maybe it's not the model of a perfect, beautiful adult relationship, but damn if that's not what happens to a lot of kids who are in their first relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also something I find really interesting about that is, like, kind of this, you were kind of talking about, like, the pre-sexual sort of right on the cusp of sexuality thing. I remember from Alex Reed's Twilight, I remember, like, specifically, I remember how he would kind of read out and be so obsessed with, like, all of the descriptions of Edward's physicality and be like, his bronze hair. She keeps saying bronze hair. And, like, so obsessed with the fact that she retreads it a million times. She's so obsessed with how he looks. And she always refers to him as, like, beautiful. And, like, she talks about him in a really, like, aesthetic way. Like, it's not sexual. It's barely sensual. She talks about him like he's a statue in a museum. Like, because I think that also belongs to that kind of just on the cusp of, like, feeling the sexual urges. It's like she's talking about how beautiful he is because she, you know, like, is she gonna say, like, is this character, the specific character, going to, like, start talking about how, like, she wants to bone down? No, like, it wouldn't be in character. But yeah, anyway, I don't know.
Yeah, well, and especially at that age, that is the age that obviously this is not Bella's experience as far as when she finds out what Edward is and what he is capable of. But that is also the age at which the idea of a sexualized, like, you know, if you're a cis, straight teenage girl, the type of guy that you are attracted to is kind of this more polished version of a guy. It's this kind of, like, safer idea. That's why boy bands are so popular. It's this kind of
he's clean.
Clean, non-aggressive thing. And obviously, again, that twists in Twilight. I think what I'm getting from this is that Bella is a pretty solid way to capture a certain type of girl's teenage experience. I think maybe if we're going to point at Twilight and say this is a problem, I think the where that comes in is who is curating the story for us. I do think it's still like the idea of what Stephenie Meyer is putting on a pedestal or not, and the kind of tone that she is approaching in that. Is where certain problems arise. But as far as depiction of Bella as a character in that relationship as something that she as a character desires, that feels totally right.
Yeah, I think, like, I feel like these days my temptation is always to go on kind of the defensive with Twilight, because I think it just feels like we are all, like, so aware of the many, like, issues with, I mean, like, you know, as I was watching, like, the marriage scene, the bit where, like, Charlie, like, hands her off, like, barely 18 into Edward's, like, you know, in my head I was thinking of it as, like, you know, in the old-fashioned way, he's, like, quote, giving her away, unquote, and it really feels like a custody switch, because then he starts talking about, this is so weird how you're not going to live in my house anymore, and I'm like, yeah, she just, like, graduated high school and is now going to move in with her husband.
She's a child. That is a little bit upsetting to me, is that she is a child.
Right, and then the whole, like, pregnancy speed run, it feels very, like, I don't know, that's when... I don't know. I
was an accurate
like...
depiction of what happens to your body when you're pregnant.
The pregnant one of the three of us.
I was going to say, as the one person on this episode who has experienced pregnancy, I can say that when I was watching Breaking Dawn Part 1, this time around, the first time I have watched it post-pregnancy, I was watching and going, oh, yeah, that's totally how it is. Like, it goes slower when you're actually going through it, but, like, I recognize that haggard look on her face and the inability to stand up properly, and if they would just show me her horribly swollen feet and tell me what all her food cravings are, then...
Oh my god.
Then we'd have it spot on.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think that you're absolutely right, Brennan, that, like, of course... this is being curated through a particular kind of odd perspective, given that it's Stephenie Meyer, and we have all read the things about how the whole thing is kind of a metaphor for Mormonism, and at the very least, this is a good Mormon relationship between a good secretly Mormon boy and girl. And again, all of teenage girlhood is a very big pedestal to put on Bella's shoulders. So I think it's also a mistake to treat her as some kind of universal. However, for capturing one particular common aspect of the straight teenage girl experience, it's a pretty darn good capture.
Yeah. And,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, sorry.
oh, yeah, it's also, like, you know, I think it's useful for the straight teenage girl experience, but it's also, I feel like there are bones thrown in to, like, maybe not intentional bones, but I think there are bones thrown in to, like, non-straight people as well.
I was gonna say, is one of those bones named Alice?
Maybe. I just feel like, well, of course there's, like, I think there can be a coming out reading or, like, a closet reading of anything that involves, like, a secret magical world. Like, I think, that's just gonna be easy all day to be like, there's parts of me that I don't feel like I can talk about and stuff like that I feel like I have to keep secret from my family and everything like that. But yeah, so I don't know. I think probably the phenomenon aspect comes from it being like a very like relatable text of straight teenage girlhood, but I think that it's interesting to me from like other perspectives as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and also the idea that the book Twilight would be better if Bella was super smart and super capable and always made the right decision. What
it would be 5 pages long.
Yeah. Yeah, if she meets Edward and is like, "Oh no, thank you," and then she goes to geography class. Like, where's the book?
I'm sorry, my rational mind has taken over. I see the threat to my life. Goodbye.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry, you're how old?
My God. But
logic be gone.
Yeah, exactly. But Mandy, you kind of implied earlier that you said like Bella, at least in the books, is a good character. Do you
so this
do you
could
think
be
that there's something lost in translation?
I do. So this could be a good transition into talking about the film, since this is a movie podcast after all. Though instead of talking about our bowel movements for 30 minutes, we talked about young adult fiction.
And fan fiction.
Yeah, and fan fiction.
Yes.
Class of the place up around here.
Good.
So I say on the page because I think one of the biggest problems with the Twilight films is the amount of contempt with which so many people involved in them clearly approached the source material.
Mm-hmm.
Because, okay, so, like, it was pretty much a given as soon as the book started making millions of dollars that, yeah, there are going to be movies, especially because, like, the Harry Potter movies were coming out, and, okay, now you're basically obligated to turn all the successful young adult series into movies, and you're going to follow the exact pattern of the Harry Potter movies, which is why Breaking Dawn is going to be split into 2 movies, even though maybe 6 things actually happen in Breaking Dawn.
Such a choice. I kind of enjoy that choice because I like
I
the
do
just
too.
kind of shaggy hangout movie that Breaking Dawn Part 2 becomes before the one thing happens.
So true. No, like I consider Breaking Dawn Part 1 a high point of the film series, and then Breaking Dawn Part 2 I like less, but there are so many delightful things about it that I will still count it in the plus column.
I like part 1 as a horror movie, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, this girl is seeing visions of a mountain of corpses on the day before her wedding. That's what she's associating with her wedding, is this a mountain of corpses that she's soon to exist atop while, like, blood is all over her face.
And the last
great.
30 minutes are nuts. Oh, my God. Like, I had forgotten how out there they got with
Gnaw
the birth
out
scene.
the baby. Yeah.
Yeah, gnaw out baby. And then, like, you can hear Bella's spine crack while she's writhing around on the floor.
Oh my goodness, that was crazy.
Yeah, that was fun. Fun childbirth memories, too.
Oh, God.
You really do see these things in a different light after you've been through some of these experiences. But anyway, so it's not any particular secret that the 2 leads, Kristen Stewart as Bella Swan and Robert Pattinson as Edward Cullen, didn't think much of the roles that they were in. Robert Pattinson kind of openly hated on the role that he was in. And I respect both of them immensely as actors. They have gone on to have very respectable careers, playing very good and very interesting roles. But I think it is a shame that they both approached those roles with so much disdain. Because I think that there were opportunities, had you had actors who were willing to take this seriously, to bring a lot more of what existed on the page into the characters as they existed on film. Because, like, especially in Twilight #1, like, Bella is kind of boring and dour and artificially clumsy and all the stuff that people who haven't read the books always accuse her of being. And it's like, because that's what Kristen Stewart thought of her. And I think it would have been nice had perhaps, like, you know, somebody sat her down or sat somebody down, maybe with Stephanie Meyer, maybe with the screenwriter, met with Catherine Hardwicke and been like, we're going to treat this character with respect, and we're going to treat this character like as a real role that we're going to bring out all the potential from. And I think Catherine Hardwicke tried the hardest of the directors to do that sort of thing, but I'm not sure anybody really got there.
I think,
and certainly the actors didn't get there.
Yeah, I do kind of share some of those same feelings. I think maybe that's why New Moon is my favorite one, because I think Kristen Stewart, like, actually really pulls off, like, the ultimate emo, like, sad girl, near suicidal vibe in New Moon really well. And then Edward has the benefit of being off screen for most of New Moon.
Yes.
So there's less of, like, Robert Pattinson's, like, kind of like, oh god, I can't believe I'm saying these words vibe, which he just, does sort of exude throughout the whole thing. I am curious, Brennan, what your thoughts are on, like, kind of the craft of the movies, because I don't feel as if I can comment too much on, like, for instance, like, where the fault in the editing lies. I know it's bad, but I'm not sure why.
I wish I could offer more insight. Like, I didn't rewatch these movies, so they're not particularly fresh in my mind at that kind of level. I would definitely say, as far as, again, I have not seen New Moon. But I think, like I said, Catherine Hardwicke, like, put her whole heart into doing that movie justice, that first one. And I think Bill Condon in Breaking Dawn Parts 1 and 2, he was just kind of handed a platter of things that were already established. But I think you're like, okay, there's a director on set.
Yeah.
Someone made decision, or like, maybe not actively making decisions in the way that Catherine Hardwicke did, but people would ask him questions and he would have answers.
Yeah. Bill Condon's specialty, for the most part, seems to be taking something that should be an absolute dumpster fire and turning it into a functional piece of product, often no more and no less, but more functional than it should be.
What are his other calling cards?
His movie that everybody really likes is Kinsey. Which I don't remember anything particularly interesting directorially about it, but it's a good film. And then he directed The New Beauty and the Beast.
He did, with Emma Watson.
Oh dear. Okay.
And he directed the Ian McKellen the one where he plays James Whale, the director of Frankenstein.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I don't remember
Gods
what
and
that's
Monsters.
called.
That's what it's
Okay,
called. Gods
yes.
and Monsters. That movie's really good.
Huh.
I need to see that.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah, it's Ian McKellen basically doing very horny artwork of Brendan Fraser. So it's a good film.
You
Sounds
have said many correct words.
Yeah. Great movie, highly recommend. But yeah, Bill Condon's like doing something, and I will say, the end credits of Breaking Dawn Part 2 is maybe the best thing in franchise cinema that has ever happened.
They're so melodramatic, and I love them so much.
Yeah, they are
long.
unapologetically
Really long.
earnest and celebrating every last thing about Twilight. And
Yeah.
I think that's this kind of vainglorious celebration that I can't resist. I think it would only be improved if it was less slate gray with that filter.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's extremely slate gray.
But Christina Perry's emoting her heart out. She's singing about how
Love
long
you
she's
for
gonna love you.
1,000 years. It's been stuck in my head all of yesterday and all of
For
today,
sure.
and it's gonna keep going.
That is your fate. I did actually.
Yes.
I rewatched the credit sequence before.
Good.
Before going into this podcast.
Do you
I think
remember
it is great.
Do you remember the opening credits sequence of where the font was changing
Yes.
on all the names?
They
that's
transform
upsetting.
from serifs to sans serifs.
Okay, but the best part was that my poor normal husband was watching this with us, and of course was also commenting on what he was seeing and like why the font is changing, and he was like, "Oh, the words are turning into vampires," and then we all looked at each other and was like, "He's right." And that's the stupidest thing ever, and also I love it.
But there is a commitment.
There
and this
is.
kind of lack of shame, which Twilight does deserve.
Yes.
And also I love for the credits for Bella and Jacob and Edward, the way that you see the first time they're introduced in the books, like with the pages flipping.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I have a lot of thoughts about the end
The
credits.
highlighted word forever. That was a
Great.
choice.
So good.
Brennan, I
But,
have to ask, were you ever Team Jacob at any point?
I would pick Jacob for myself.
Okay.
I think it's such a foregone conclusion that Bella's going to end up with Edward. It's hard
Right.
to root. I feel like there's no point
Yeah.
in rooting for either of them.
Yeah.
I don't know, Mandy, do you agree?
I was Team Jacob in the movies when he had long hair. And yes, I know his wig looked ridiculous and I don't care. When Taylor Lautner has short hair, he looks like he's 12.
That makes sense.
He looks like he's a really ripped 12-year-old and that's not sexy. I'm sorry.
Yeah, fair enough.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, sorry, not to harp on the credits too much. That is
No,
what I've
please.
seen the most out of Twilight. I did because I was sweeping up popcorn during the credits.
Right, of course.
I did memorize at the time all of the songs that played over the entire credits. So like
gosh.
"Bittersweet" by Ellie
Oh,
Goulding, I would just be
good.
like, "Baby, don't forget my name."
Nice.
But yeah, so it was a
Amazing.
great time.
Excellent.
It's got some good needle drops.
Yeah, honestly,
Well,
the soundtracks
yeah.
were high quality all the way through.
Yeah, chef's kiss on the whoever was the music supervisor on this entire franchise.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That person took their job seriously.
It's funny. I feel like the way that we're talking about this, one could listen to this and conceivably think that we thought they were all like 4 to 5 star movies.
It's true.
Which is not accurate.
No.
Oh,
Yeah, I
gosh.
was looking at
Oh.
I was looking at everybody's Letterboxd ratings of them, and Brennan, yours were the lowest of ours by a considerable margin.
I think that makes sense. And also, I would if someone said, "Hey, do you want to sit down and watch any of these movies?" I don't think I would say no.
That's fair.
I don't think that they're particularly good movies on a whole, but I've had a good time watching all of the ones that I've seen. Except I don't remember
Especially-
Eclipse. Eclipse was a long time ago.
It's okay. I don't remember Eclipse either, and I rewatched it recently.
Yes. A week ago I saw it, and yes, I remember the bit where the werewolf is used as a climate control device to create warmth in a tent that they decide to sleep in for some reason.
I remember that. Okay,
Yeah.
yes.
And then there's also, I think the main event of the movie is that Bella decides that she does love Jacob, but just not enough. Which is not, it doesn't functionally, what does that do? Not very much. I don't know. I think if anyone wanted me to rewatch them with them, I would watch any of them again except for Eclipse, especially because they play so well if you're with a friend. Because, like, I feel like they're so, like, hot and cold where, like, at least for me, I either am thinking about, like, interesting things where I'm like, what themes are we going through here? Like, what are these bizarre ideas that are being put on the screen? Like, this character is so strange. Like, all of my, like, pre-adolescent feelings, like, coming up and roiling within me. It's either that stuff or I'm like laughing my guts out because something has just happened and it's unfathomably stupid. Like, and both of those things are great with people. So it's just
Yes.
such a good party watch.
I also admit that I do find, especially in the movies, most of the werewolf stuff incredibly boring. It doesn't help that the werewolves look like complete ass.
Oh my god, they look so bad.
Like, I don't know. I'm not 100% sure where the budget went in these movies, but more of it went to Kristen Stewart's makeup than went to any of the CG for the werewolves.
Yeah, that's a bummer. I actually happened to on Instagram upon a clip where she's nuzzling the werewolf, and it is grim. This uncanny valley town.
Someone has promised her that there will be a big cuddly wolf in the spot that she is currently nuzzling, and she does not believe them for a second.
And she was right not to.
She was right not to, exactly.
It's not fuzzy. It's kind of like there's like chunks of fur that are like
Yes.
plasticine.
Yeah. Bristly.
It's more like they're feathered.
They're made out of fake
Yes.
Christmas trees.
Yes. Oh my god. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
That's upsetting and also completely accurate.
I'm so sorry. That's the worst scene in the entire franchise is the werewolf meeting in, I think, Breaking Dawn Part 1.
Oh my god, it's so bad.
So funny. Brennan,
yeah,
I
aren't
don't
they
know
like
if you, do you remember
telepathically
this?
talking to each other?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
So it's just freaking voiceovers over
it's
these terrible
voiceovers,
CGI
and the
wolves.
CGI wolves are just all snarling with the exact same horrible muscle movements. It's so silly.
That was definitely a part of Breaking Dawn Part 1 where I was like, are we done yet?
I laughed so hard. I was like, play this movie for another 4 hours. Oh, God.
Beautiful.
Well, see, that's the thing. Because, like, for movies that are this kind of hot and cold, the hot parts, you're like, okay, fuck yeah, that was awesome. And then
Yeah.
the low parts, you're like, okay, fuck yeah. Like, I mean, that's what you were saying, Rioghnach. Like, if you come to it with the right sense of, or with just the right kind of balance in your soul of what you're ready for, like, it's fun to experience the entire way through.
Yeah.
It really is.
I really think so. And I think, like, there's occasional moments of, like sanity or lucidity. I think, like, Charlie, who's her dad, and then her, quote, best friend, unquote, who secretly hates her, whose name is Jessica, who's, like, just a catty biatch, and I love her, and who's played by Anna Kendrick. Those two performances are really good, and I think their lines really do so much to sort of ground the ridiculousness in something vaguely resembling normal life. Like, in Breaking Dawn, during the wedding scene, Anna Kendrick is, like, just joking about her being pregnant and being like, well, who else gets married at 18? Whatever.
Which, like, okay, fair.
Right. And, like, there's, just enough moments, I think, with those two in particular where, like, it brings it back to being something that you're like, oh, she has, like, a vaguely recognizable life despite all of the complete ludicrousness.
And then Billy Burke, who is Charlie Swan, Bella's police chief father, he is
So
the
good.
hero of this franchise. He is so good. He is one of the characters that I think took a step up.
Yeah,
From
he
the page to
actually
the
seemed
screen.
to,
Because Charlie is kind of, because we're hearing everything from Bella's perspective in the books. Charlie is Bella's boring dad that she can't really relate to. And she recognizes that he's nice, but he's also, her boring square dad who's a cop. And who occasionally threatens to kill her boyfriend because that's the kind of funny, stereotypical thing that we're doing. And in the movies, just, like, he is, like, the way Billy Burke plays him, it's just, like, he can't believe he's doing any of this.
Yeah.
And yet he's doing this because he loves his little girl.
Yeah, and it's not like he can't believe he's doing this, like, that he's playing this part in this ridiculous franchise. He's like a dad who's having those dad feelings. And, like, that really makes me think about what you were saying about, like, Mandy, about, like, Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson's performances, because, like, I think, like, Charlie's performance actually feels real and grounded, and even stuff like he encounters, like, the CGI wolves, like, one time, and he, like, startles back from, like, the CGI wolf in a way that feels genuinely like he's in the same space as the CGI wolf.
Yeah.
So, like, he even elevates that sort of thing. And
The
I'm like,
scene right before that where Jacob starts undressing in front of him, preparation for turning into a werewolf, is possibly the best scene in the entire franchise.
the horror and bewilderment on Charlie's face. Oh my god.
Yeah, speaking of the bisexuality of
I had never shipped Jacob and Charlie Swan before, but I think I might have started, even though that's a little bit gross. That's a little bit gross, but I don't care right now.
Well, look, Jacob.
It's a smaller age difference than Bella and Edward.
That's true.
Well, and it's a smaller age difference than Jacob and Renesmee, the baby he's in love with.
Renesmee's her name. Oh my god. It's such a bad name. Oh my god.
It's again, that's another thing. Like, just the fact that they proudly name a character that and then keep saying it.
Yeah.
And then she complains when Jacob tries to give her a less terrible nickname.
Yeah. Whew. I just again I this if you saw my Letterboxd, Mandy, you saw that I mentioned this, but just the watching Twilight again, I was just like all I could think was, okay, Renesmee is what you're gonna name your child, and I cannot take you seriously.
It's great because when she says Renesmee, Jacob doesn't say anything. Like, Edward starts monologuing about how it's sweet and he really loves it, and Jacob's the one in the foreground, and everything in his face is screaming, "This is the worst shit I've heard in my life." And he's
Jacob's
right.
like, this is the woman I'm going to marry, and her name is Renesmee.
Oh god.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Oh god.
Oh.
It's funny, because I feel like a lot of the most glaring issues with Twilight could have been, like, sort of resolved or softened if anybody like came in with sort of an ounce of like rationality, because like Renesmee is clearly a horrible name. Like everyone knows that it's a horrible name. And like there's also, you know, certain things like the glittery skin, like if that had been changed somehow, like there are certain things that jar out because they're so bizarre. And then I'm like, you know, would it have been ridiculed so much if there weren't these obvious calling cards that people could just list off and be like, ooh, sparkly vampire is such a stupid whatever. But then I'm also like, if we had taken out the really ridiculous campy stuff, would it have lost a vital part of its DNA?
I think it absolutely would have lost a lot of its charm.
Yeah, and I think that one thing about teen girl media that is at its best is that it has this kind of unflagging commitment to the extremely earnest and extremely daffy kind of material that's at its heart sometimes.
Yeah.
And
I
think that, yeah.
Anybody who has seen my work on alternate ending, among other things, knows that the one thing that I cannot resist is extreme non-cynicism. Just extreme earnestness.
Yes, go into
The
it.
more sincere and committed to this you are, the more unreservedly I'm going to love you, no matter how stupid it is.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you're
I think-
Dinesh D'Souza.
Well, there's a line, especially as to what you're committed to also.
Yeah. Sorry.
But
Also, I don't believe he's earnest, but that's beside the point.
well, yeah, fair enough. But yeah, sincerity is such an important part of the teen experience, whatever gender you grew up expressing, because all of your emotions are hitting you so fast with this kind of unalloyed, potent hormonal register that even though, you know, like cynical, like sarcastic teenage nonsense or whatever,
Edgy
like
jokes.
Yep.
yeah, it's all putting on a front because everything you're feeling is just so goddamn powerful and overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's very true.
Yeah.
If we are getting to a good time to put in the break, I was thinking that a fun thing to do after the break might actually be to just work our way through the movies and do a little bit of a quality assessment for each one, for those of you who are no doubt now considering your Twilight rewatch for the 10th
Yes.
anniversary.
I totally forgot to do a break. We should do that. We should also we'll do it like a play where the first act is a lot longer than the second act.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. We've been talking about the Twilights for a while because there's just so much to discuss.
There really is.
There really is, and there's so much more that we're like afterwards. We're gonna be like, I can't believe I didn't mention this.
Yeah.
We haven't even talked about Jackson Rathbone yet.
Oh my god!
And we
Oh my
can't
God.
not
Well-
talk about Jackson Rathbone.
Oh God, we have to. Okay, but yeah, real quick before we head to our break, I don't know why. You know what? Fuck that. I hate when they're like, before we head to our breaks, like, no, you're heading into the break now, and this is when we say the things. Anyway, sorry, Rob. I'm copy editing in the moment. Remember, you can find more details about all the movies we've watched at our website, alternateending.com. All three of us here have contributed written things to that website, so you can check them
Yes,
all
we have.
out. And you might be wondering about ways to support the show. You can get early access and exclusive content, make us watch a movie, pick your own episode topic, and more from our Patreon site. And I do want to thank all our listeners who support the show and make their Amazon purchases through our site. Doing it is easy. Just go to our website, alternateending.com, click on our Amazon banner, and seamlessly go about your purchases. All proceeds go to making our show better. I do not have a list of Amazon things because I am not privy to the things that require money
That is
they have passwords
okay.
for. Yeah, exactly. But actually, while we're in this space, do you want to tell people where they can find you out on the internet and the things that you do?
Oh yeah.
Go
Let's
ahead.
see. Okay, so I write books under a pen name, which is Riley Redgate, and I'm on Instagram at Riley, Riley, Redgate, Redgate. And I'm also on Tumblr at Batman Symbol. That's my URL.
Love it.
Yeah.
I highly recommend her book Final Draft. I read that and I cried, and it's very good.
That's so sweet.
Indeed. I highly recommend her book Noteworthy, which brought back fond memories of a cappella drama.
Yes.
Aw.
Live for it.
As for me, you can follow me on Twitter, but I don't know why you would. So in general, you can find me on Alternate Ending. I write another boring blog about teaching writing, where you can also read stuff if that's the kind of thing that interests you. And you can also find me on my Star Trek Enterprise podcast with my husband, which will be releasing a new episode soon. We promise. I know it's been a really long time. Like everything else in my life, I'm going to blame it on my toddler.
Great. And you can find me on Twitter for as long as that's a thing, at It's Raining Bren.
Oh, it's not going anywhere.
Oh, no, I do agree with that. I might go somewhere, because even before all of this nonsense, I was starting to feel really poisoned by Twitter, and I was like, do I want to ever be here? Yeah. You can also find me on Instagram at The Burning Clem. I'm on this podcast a lot. I do Bride of Alternate Ending with Tim. Listen to us talk about horror movies. Next month, this is an exclusive for Pass the Popcorn, because I don't think it's been announced yet, at least as the time we're recording. We're discussing horror films that are incidentally set on Christmas. So they are not Christmas horror films, but they just take place during the season.
Interesting. What a subgenre.
So Black Christmas.
Not Black Christmas. But it's a surprisingly robust subgenre. Like, one of the movies that's going to be on the Patreon poll is the cult film Night of the Comet, which is about Valley Girls in the apocalypse. But the apocalypse occurs during the Christmas season, so all of the windows in the malls are dressed up with the wintry Santa stuff, and it's just kind of in the background and never called attention to.
Interesting.
And anyway, so yeah, keep an eye out for that. But yes, let's go through the Twilight movies.
Going through the Twilight movies. Okay, well, let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. And talk about Twilight the Mothership. Which of the 5 films is number 3 in my Twilight ranking? It is right there in the middle.
Interesting. Okay, I can't wait to hear what the top 2 are.
Yeah, you know what? I think I agree with... No. I like it second best.
Okay.
It's number 2 for me.
That's fair.
For the record, it is my number 1, and again, reminding that I have not seen New Moon.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. You gotta see New Moon, and then you have to tell us what you think of it.
I also think,
I will.
You're getting a very small sample size here. Like, Gavin, another alternate ending contributor, was on our Letterboxd and was commenting on mine, seeing that I had given New Moon 3.5 stars or something, and was just totally baffled. And all of my friends' ratings for New Moon are rock bottom.
Oh yeah,
it is not normal, I think, to have this positive a reception to New Moon. So temper your expectations.
Oh, yeah. But also for the Twilight series, I fully embrace the Carrie Jarasinski school of film criticism of feelings over form, 100%.
There we go.
And so because of that, I do think that Twilight, the original, is probably formally the best of the Twilight films. Again, because Catherine Hardwicke is trying her darndest to make this into a real movie. Mm-hmm. It's just that despite that, there are other films in the series that I find more enjoyable.
Yeah. I agree with that assessment.
No, that's totally fair. But yeah, no, the first Twilight... Rockin' soundtrack. The moment when Edward saves her from the van and Tremble for My Beloved by Collective Soul starts playing.
It's so good. Oh my god.
Yeah, talk about just pure eroticism, I love that.
The Vampire Baseball game is better than most World Series.
That is
Spicy
very
take.
fun. And we haven't really talked about... I like Ashley Greene as Alice quite a bit.
We should talk about the other Cullens, because they add a lot of flavor to this. I like Ashley Greene as Alice. I also really like, and now I've forgotten his name, that one guy who isn't Jackson Rathbone, who plays Emmett.
Kellen Lutz?
Kellen Lutz, that's his
Kellen
name. I was
Lutz.
Karen? No, Kellen Lutz.
Can't be that.
Yeah. He's just having fun the entire time that he's on screen.
Just happy to be there. Which is great.
Yeah, he's kind of a puppy dog. He does that. He's in the first season of The Comeback with Lisa Kudrow, and he's doing a similar thing that's really adorable.
That's lovely. And
nice.
I think he and Rosalie have my favorite of the Cullen couple dynamics as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's because trying to generate chemistry with Jackson Rathbone would be like trying to generate chemistry with a damp towel.
Oh, Jackson. Oh my god. I feel awful too, because Jackson Rathbone is probably the person on screen who is taking this the most seriously.
That's true. Oh my gosh. Now I feel bad for slandering him, because he's doing what we asked of the others.
But he's just not very good at it.
It's rough. It's rough to see. But yeah, okay. Well, should we continue with our rankings?
I think we should, yes.
Yeah. We can circle back to the Collins.
Yes. So Twilight is number 3 for me. I have something different written down, but I think I'm going to flip 2 of these. New Moon is number 2 on my list, I would say.
Okay. New Moon is first for me, and
I think that's very reasonable.
I feel like I need to represent what I've heard from the people and just say that not everybody loves this movie. But I'm
New
so
Moon
glad that
is
you
the
do.
most bonkers of the movies, I would say.
It's my number 0 for now.
Fair enough. Inherent, just because of the things that happen in New Moon, there is no way it was not just going to be completely nuts.
I'm like, it's a depression movie. It's a circular, plotless depression movie, because, shocker, that's how depression feels.
It is.
You're
And
not
also,
an interesting person when you're depressed.
And also, because Bella is depressed, she is at her most, like, reckless and passionate and lunatic at the same time.
It's great. I love it.
And that is actually quite interesting to watch unfold. And Kristen Stewart does put in her best performance in New Moon.
Yeah.
I think Taylor Lautner, who, like, he's just kind of there
Yeah.
for a lot of the series, but he does actually get a chance to shine in New Moon because he's occupying all the screen time that Robert Pattinson would normally get.
Right.
And then there's Jackson Rathbone.
Speaking of Jackson Rathbone. Oh, go ahead.
Probably barely in New Moon, right? Because like all the siblings are gone.
Yeah.
Yes.
He's barely in New Moon, but he is kind of more in Eclipse.
He sure is.
A sure number 5, if ever there was
God.
one.
Yes, Eclipse is also 5th out of 5 in my rankings.
Shit, yeah.
That's my bottom one too, because it's the one that I was thinking back on and I was like, I remember literally nothing about this movie other than that there's a tent.
Yeah.
There we go.
Tent. That's it.
There's a werewolf functioning as a personal heater in the tent.
Mm-hmm. There's some arguments where there's some, charged arguments where Edward and Jacob get in each other's space, which that's kind of fun.
Which is kind of hot if you look at it the right way,
but mostly it's not.
but mostly it's not.
Look, that's good for some Jedward gifts and not much else.
Yep.
Yes.
It is the movie where all of the leads, including Taylor Lautner, clearly have the most contempt for what they are doing.
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
And Jackson Rathbone has, like, how many lines? Not very many, all
maybe
things
like a
considered.
dozen?
He has maybe 12 lines, yeah. And every one of them is just the most spectacularly bad thing ever.
Yeah, because Jasper is not a wordy fellow.
No.
So
No.
it's probably for the best.
So I'm going out of order a little bit now, but last night, as we were watching Breaking Dawn Part 2, I realized that Jackson Rathbone was attempting to do a Southern accent for the entire franchise.
Uh-huh.
I had never realized that before.
It drifts
Yeah.
in and out.
The moment where that clicks is truly devastating.
He said one word where I was just like, did he mean to do that? And then I realized that, yes, he did.
Oh my god.
And then I my heart went out to him. It is a shame, too, though, because I find Jasper to be one of the more... Again, in the books, I find Jasper to be one of the more interesting Cullens, despite the fact that he is not a man of many words. I think his origin story is the most interesting of the bunch of
weird
them.
Confederate origin story.
Yeah.
Yeah. His weird Confederate origin story, but I found it compelling at the time.
I love that they sneak the fact that he was a Confederate into dialogue by... they could have said, like, they're, like, preparing for some battle in Eclipse. And they could have said, they could have written it so that he said, my time in the army didn't prepare me for this. Instead, they try and smuggle in the information by going, oh, my time in the Confederate army didn't prepare me for this. The what? Sorry, say that a little louder. You're the what army?
He's like, no, I read that the way it was meant to be read. I just didn't do it well.
Bless.
It's true. But, a boy growing up in the South when he probably would have been in the Confederate Army. I don't know why he feels the need to announce that to everybody now.
Yeah.
But,
He's been in enough history classes.
it's true.
should have gotten the picture.
It is a point of perpetual amusement that these 100-year-old vampires keep going back to high school.
Oh my god. Like, at least pick college. What the fuck?
Or at least pretend that you're homeschooled.
Yeah.
Also, like, just, what is wrong with all of you? High school isn't that great.
They want to get socialized. They want to keep up with the times so that they can use the
They
right
want to
slang
keep up.
to blend in.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So they can have all the right social media accounts.
Call in
Think-
TikTok.
All,
God, these
all the
books are not coming
coolest
out now.
AAM away messages.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my god.
Breaking Dawn Part 1. Where's that going to be for you?
Breaking Dawn Part 1 is at the top of my list.
Okay. Yeah, that's number 2 for me,
Interesting.
I think.
Oh, because
number 3.
that's the pregnancy one. That's the one where they finally get to have sex.
It
Yeah.
is. The sex is the most like PG-13 thing ever. Except for the part where like he cracks the bed in two,
Yeah.
which is just funny.
It's pretty hot. You know?
It is.
This one's probably my number 3, but I enjoy both the Breaking Dawn movies in
Yeah.
quite a bit.
Yeah.
I will say I have seen Breaking Dawn Part 2 probably 8 times at this point.
God.
It is definitely the Twilight movie that I have watched the most. And I will tell you the reason for that momentarily when we get to Breaking Dawn Part 2.
Okay.
But the things that I love about Breaking Dawn Part 1, this again will be a somewhat spicy take among Twilight criticism, but I love the wedding. I love the wedding scene. I think it is genuinely really romantic. I try not to think about the fact that it's like a pair of functional teenagers getting married because that's gross and I don't want to think about that.
Yeah.
But a thing that people make fun of a lot is like Bella doesn't smile at her own wedding. And it's like, well, of course she doesn't smile. She's freaked out. She's feeling all kinds of things.
Yeah.
She is a girl who is making a lifelong commitment right now to somebody that, like, you know, she kind of probably realizes in the back of her mind that she's rushing into this, which is why she's having terrible dreams about it.
Yeah.
And, like, her facial expression when she is walking towards her handsome groom, of course, it's not unhappy. It's more just like she's feeling all the feelings and doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, and she knows she has to give away her whole family as well. She's
That
like, I have
too.
to fake my
Yeah.
own death and pretend like I don't exist anymore.
Yeah, so, like, this is a tough moment for her. Like, it's a happy moment, but there's also a lot of other stuff going on underneath it. Yeah. And then, like, you know, Edward's actually really sweet to her throughout, and he seems like he kind of gets it in a way that he hasn't always gotten her before. And also, Kristen Stewart just looks unbelievably beautiful in her dress.
Agree.
Yeah,
Also,
Bella. Oh yeah.
it has the best opening of any of the Twilight movies because Jacob gets the wedding invitation, runs out into the rain, and off comes the shirt.
Within 5 seconds of the movie starting.
And he just
I do
starts
love
charging through
unmotivated
the
nudity.
woods.
Yes,
It's so
completely
great.
unmotivated. But yeah. Brennan, what were you going to say?
I was gonna say also about criticizing Bella smiling at the wedding. Bella, classically not really a smiler.
Yeah,
I would
it's
say.
true.
But also, the only thing that would have improved that Jacob scene is if he like goes off and dances in the woods like Kevin Bacon in Footloose or something.
It's so true.
Oh my gosh.
When will someone make Twilight the stage musical? When will someone do this for me?
I really love Jacob's... Oh, you're what?
I'm sure that some off Broadway production has happened, but I'm not
Probably.
aware of it.
That would be great.
But I'm concerned that it's going to be like making fun of Twilight the musical, and that's not actually what I want. I want sincere Twilight the musical.
Only then can it be as funny as it deserves to be in
Exactly.
sections, and then as weird as it must be in others.
Exactly. Then we get to, you know, their honeymoon where they have a lot of very, like, gentle PG-13 sex in which Edward breaks the bed.
And Liz bruises all
I
over
again
her body,
appreciate
so
that
there's
Bella. Yeah, I again appreciate that Bella is a teenage girl who gets to be horny.
Yeah.
Because we don't have enough teenage girls in popular media and fiction who are allowed to be horny, and this is not treated as something shameful.
Yeah.
And then she gets pregnant, and then we get all the unintentional hilarity that I love, including Twilight attempting to discourse on the subject of abortion.
Oh my god.
And handling it with all the grace that you would expect.
I think the less said about that, the better. Jesus. Like,
God. Like, this is not the time for the tangent. I have a mini tangent I will try to breeze through. I've been watching Melrose Place, and
Okay. Yeah.
I'm currently nearing the end of season 2, and we have had 3 different pregnancies each of which they have brought up the word abortion because it's the 90s and they're like,
Of course.
But then they of course decide that they couldn't possibly. And so far 2 out of 3 have ended with a miscarriage because they're like, well, we're not going to have babies on Melrose Place, but we also can't have abortions. And I'm just like, this is really depressing.
Yeah. That's really sad.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, continue.
Oh my gosh.
There's a moment when like everybody is it's a moment when I just feel absolutely terrible for Bella because like she's the pregnant one sitting there being miserable and everybody around her is discussing basically without her what they're going to do with her and the vampire baby.
Yeah.
And it's just like I feel for her so hard in that moment because like nobody's actually asking her what she wants at this moment. But then Alice says something about, like, the fetus is killing her. And then Rosalie turns to Alice and goes, say the word, Alice. It's a baby.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh
Jesus.
God.
Yeah.
God. Please stop.
Ooh, yep.
Like,
Yep.
please stick to being fun, stupid crap.
Yeah.
And don't try to tackle abortion.
Oh my god. Yeah.
Say the word, Alice. It's Renesmee.
It's Renesmee.
It seals the deal. No.
And after that, everybody's like, okay, we're definitely getting rid of it.
Yeah, some babies can be named Renesmee at up to 12 weeks.
Oh dear.
I'm so sorry.
Oh my God.
Well, okay, we've definitely lost.
Okay, so we're putting
Mormons
that
now,
on the next
so,
round of alternate ending merchandise. I want a coffee mug that says some babies can be named Renesmee. Weeks. Oh my God. And then of course we get to the birth scene when just like everything goes straight to like Eli Roth Town.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. It's a fun movie.
It is.
Number 2, I think, is my number 4 by Breaking Dawn Part 2
Same.
is my number 4. Kind of by default. I enjoy it. I think it's fun. But I don't think it's got the fun, pulpy feeling of Part 1, which is why I'm demoting it. So
There's a little too much sitting around waiting for me in Breaking Dawn Part 2.
I kind of like that because they're just like, let's go see what these other vampires from across the world have been up to.
I totally respect that, and I might have actually enjoyed it more if they had just gone for more of a hangout movie. But as it is, my problem is that I know Michael Sheen is coming.
Got it.
And
we gotta have
all
more
of the
it.
hangout stuff with all the other vampires is preventing Michael Sheen from showing up and taking over the movie.
Yeah, as great as waterbending Rami Malek is.
I didn't realize that Rami Malek was in it until we watched it last night.
Oh yeah, there's so like Lee Pace is in these.
Lee Pace is in it.
There's
Lee
so
Pace is
many-
in it. I didn't realize that either.
It's wild.
And Rami Malek is so happy and he's having so much fun. He's like, yay, I'm in a movie. Isn't this cool?
Yeah, because he would have been Ackman Ra in Night at the Museum, and then kind of probably didn't do a lot between then and this. So he's like,
He was
I'm
a
back,
baby.
Yeah.
He was a baby
Yeah.
at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And just like
then, of
his
course,
smile is so sweet. He's the happy little vampire.
There's also obviously the big kind of third act set piece of Breaking Down Part 2 does also go to Eli Roth Town for a bit, which is incredible.
It's incredible. And then it's all a dream, and that's the stupidest thing, but I also still kind of love it.
Look, that's the way that because obviously Stephanie Meyer's text is like Shakespeare, like it's canon, you can't touch it or change it in any way. So this was the way for them to put something interesting in the third act of the movie.
Yes.
It is.
It's like not just gonna be, and then they considered having a fight, but never mind.
Yeah,
Nothing.
exactly.
That and also Michael Sheen.
Yes.
So, for those of you relatively unfamiliar with Twilight lore, the vampires in Twilight are ruled by a council of kind of Italian vampires called the Volturi.
Yes.
And they're basically like the enforcers of the Twilight world. They're a little like the vampire pope and cardinals, essentially.
Yeah.
And the head of the Volturi is a vampire named Aro, who is played by Michael Sheen. Michael Sheen knows exactly what kind of movie he is in, and he is fine with that.
He's having so much fun.
He
It's
is
great.
having such a great time. He turns the Michael Sheen hamometer up as far as it goes, and then turns it a little bit farther at the end, just for good measure.
So good.
Every time he's on screen, it's just like he's rubbing his fingers together and he's grinning and he's staring creepily at you and
Doing
he's
an
gazing
insane
into
giggle.
your soul
It's the
and
best.
doing an insane giggle with
Yeah.
his blood red eyes are super wide. And he's delivering all his lines in like a Jafar-like voice of like, I would like to meet the child.
Yeah, because
Exactly right.
he's the one person in these movies that is playing a vampire.
Yes, he's playing a vampire.
Yes. Everyone else is just people who happen to drink some blood and like be a
Yeah,
murderer
exactly.
every so often. He's like, I kill people.
Yeah, it's like the more finger work you can do, you know.
And Michael Sheen's just like, no, screw that. I'm a vampire.
Oh my god.
Yeah, exactly.
I am in my own personal Hammer horror picture over here.
I do really love how the fight mechanics and like the vampire body mechanics completely change. Like, you know, we've been talking about the lore and the world building as though it is basically consistent, but yeah, things get tossed out all the time. In Eclipse, they seem to be made out of like chunks of crystal, and then in Breaking Dawn Part 2, like that's what happens when they like wrench off their enemies' heads. They like shatter apart into like rock shards. But then by Breaking Dawn Part 2, they like there's not so much of that. Their heads seem to pop off as though they were part of like a demented Lego set. Like
Yeah,
it's
they're like your
bizarre.
Barbies when you pulled on the head a little too hard.
Yeah. Ah, man. Deranged. I love it.
Yeah, we've been talking for so long.
Yes.
Oh my god.
This is a long time.
Is there anything else you want to throw out before we close the shop? We turn off the light and Central Park goes dark and so forth.
Oh my gosh. I think for me, it's just, you know, like, Alice, call me. That's it. Yeah.
It is fitting that this podcast went on forever, just like Edward and Bella's love.
Exactly.
Honestly,
they're still in that field.
They are. They're still in that field. Their daughter has run off with Jacob at this point.
God.
And yeah, the less said about that part, again, the better. Honestly, though, these movies are a lot of fun. I'm glad we live in a world in which these movies exist.
Yes.
And in which these books exist.
How about you, Brennan?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. You know, my like I said, my Twilight journey was like I was told I was supposed to hate it, and then all the Twilight things I experienced at the time, which were a limited sphere, I was like, I enjoy all of these things. And it's like you're never not going to have a complicated relationship with Twilight, but that's kind of part of why it's so amusing to experience. So I will throw my chips in with the Twilight franchise as a whole.
Fabulous. Well, this has been fun,
Yes.
taking over the podcast.
So fun.
I hope we
Yeah,
didn't scare away all the listener base.
Yeah, well, we'll see. You know, this is that slow time where there are like all the American podcasts are not putting out stuff between Thanksgiving and Christmas, so
It's true.
we're your only option, really. So I hope you listen to us 3 times and have a great day.
Exactly.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah, bye.